yeah, I do remember that. He's the computer fellow.
Exactly. I think Nick Leverage really seems to want to play.
Okay.
But I don't know what his I'm guessing. But
No.
I really don't know.
When Dick lost.
So is your...
Haven't heard yet.
We are. It's gonna be November 12th.
Dick's been out of town with yet another old friend.
Hello.
The track back.
Oh, my favorite photographer. Wait a second, can I t-shirts today?
No. Don't worry, it's okay. I'm not as mad at you.
Yeah, she's talking.
So
Oh, I have we are privileged.
No, I'm the one who's privileged.
And I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how you see people
Alright.
in the same circle,
They're like the last.
or vice versa.
They're like our, exactly, they're like the last.
Contract to the old
Class.
Female
We have to.
that sounds great.
No, I'm just
Seriously.
emulating my own behavior on the people who I admire most.
Oh. She does flatter. So,
No, really, you guys are the citizens of the computer.
That's all good.
but actually, shifting back from that, then the last name that I can't pronounce, how do you pronounce it? Viato.
Good, how are you?
Barbara seen her really enjoy
She was
what
great.
she
I
was
hope
doing.
all that Catherine.
She's very inspiring.
Like friend over. I just don't know. I had heard her speak virtually last spring. I hope the writers. I thought I was really. I didn't know anything about her, and not enough to be like that. So I think I had just like she was really annoying, really scary. That was the first time, and really like. And I wish her idea. And I was like, oh my God.
You know, it almost begs for everybody to hear come on to talk about that before they do it, because I would think you'll get so much more out of the book now, having heard her, you know, give you the insights into ways.
I want to read it again.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by her response to consequential and how she had thought of that and all the different elements that are here.
You read that in high school.
It's like, you know, undergrad, beginning of COVID, mid-COVID. I had a similar experience being roused by Greek tragedy as I around 11th. So but what she did with it, that piece is.
I heard about that. Thinking I know really well. I don't know what she did with it at all well, and I asked Barbara, so does she leave? The woman trying to adequately bury her sister in the grave, kill her. So I gather whatever she does with her.
Okay, if you grab your last slice of pizza and get a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. Can somebody close that door for me back there, please? Okay, great. I'm Cornell Clayton, Director of the Foley Institute, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today, which features Natasha Hill, who is the Democratic candidate for Washington's 5th Congressional District, running against the incumbent Cathy McMorris Rodgers, who you might remember we had here last week. So now you can compare the two in terms of their answers to your questions. Ms. Hill is an attorney from Spokane. She's a business owner. Her practice focuses on civil litigation and especially on business and entertainment, employment, and family law. She is a graduate of Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles. and she received a bachelor's degree in sociology from a lesser institution on the other side of the state, which we won't hold against her. Natasha is a fourth-generation Washingtonian and the parent of 2 children, both of whom attend Spokane Public Schools. Join me in welcoming Natasha Hill to WH.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'll share a little bit about myself and why I decided to run at all and why I decided to run this race, and then open it up for questions and hear from all of you kind of what your interests are, what your priorities are, and why you're voting in this midterm and here today. So definitely want to thank the Institute here for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to introduce myself and share a little bit about my story. As was mentioned, I'm 4th generation in my family to grow up in Spokane, Washington. Northeast Spokane, Hilliard neighborhood, very poor, very working class, one of the poorer neighborhoods in Washington state. So we worked really hard. I watched my grandma work really hard. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. My dad's side of the family is from Chicago, but my dad didn't really show up in my life till I was about 11 years old. So very much, grew up mixed race, me and my 3 siblings, there were 4 of us. So we dealt with a lot of issues growing up. There was racism that we experienced in our family and our neighborhood. And my mom and grandma, at the end of the day, they loved and supported us. So they became advocates. They called it out. And when we called out people in our family, we didn't tell them to leave. We had a conversation about it, right? You don't just kick, grandpa's friend Dick out of the front yard. You tell him why he's wrong. You explain to him. And he had love for us. And there was this bias. There was this lack of understanding, lack of education. My grandmother grew up in tents in Twin Falls, Idaho, by the river. They had a sleeping tent and a cooking tent. They were migrant farm workers from Kansas. And when she moved to the big city of Spokane, she was, I think, elementary school age. She only went through about, 7th or 8th grade. And she got married at 16 and started her family. I do come from a family that, has cycles of teenage pregnancy. And we all had to work together to really support one another. These are difficult decisions that, families have to make, that young folks make. Depending on your life experience, you might have made a different choice. Unlike my siblings, I didn't have a child as a teenager. I was able to hustle my way through school. As was mentioned, I finished, I actually did Running Start in high school. So I did community college, which carved out a year of 4-year tuition. So I saved up some money that way. Went to University of Washington, which I will mention. I wanted to get out of this region, right? I wanted to have a different life experience. And I know there's so many people who grew up here that just want to get out and experience something different. For me, I wanted to go somewhere that seemed more diverse, that seemed more inclusive, that I was going to get experience more of a big city life. So being in Seattle was great, but the weather sucked. So I knew at that point I didn't want to stick around. And at that time, when I was graduating with a sociology degree, I didn't even know what I wanted to do. But a friend of mine was going to law school, and he was taking the LSAT. So I was like, oh, that's only 3 years. And if you go, for a graduate degree and a PhD, you're talking 4 to 6 years. And that was like way longer than I thought I wanted to be in school. So I went with the 3-year route of law school. It took me down to sunny California, which was great. And I was able to, really hustle my way through there too. I mean, one thing that growing up poor, a working class family really taught me is to find a way to overcome any odds. And sometimes that just means opening up and asking for help. And so one thing I encourage students to do when things get hard and you're experiencing life circumstances is find somebody that you feel comfortable enough with to ask for help. Try to build those mentor relationships. And that doesn't mean you have to have lunch with somebody once a month. It doesn't have to be that much of a commitment to check in. But I know that there's teachers, administrators, and professors out there, and even older students, grad students, like someone who helped me when I was applying to law school, who are there to help. But sometimes we just got to muster up that courage, to really ask for it. So I found myself homeless and experiencing, not having money for food when I was in law school. So it was really hard to stay focused. And when I did open up and reach out for help, it was like telling this whole trauma story of where I'd come from and where I'd been. And for me growing up, it was but that was everybody in my neighborhood. So growing up, I didn't feel different. I kind of felt like everybody else. And here I am in a new world, in a new state, in a new city. Feeling very different than everybody else. There was a lot of nice cars in the parking lot. There was a lot of people who had ended up in law school because they had a lot of options, like pursuing their family business. For someone like me, that wasn't an option. You know, I didn't want to be a domestic worker. I didn't want to clean houses or be a waitress or a bartender. I wanted something more. And that's why I chose my education to really be that hustle. So when I did finish law school down in Southern California, I was really upset because I thought I was going to come out and make a ton of money and have like things were going to be made, right? Like I checked all the boxes, I did all the hard work. And then we had this economic crisis where like the housing market collapsed. My mom was losing her home. So instead of paying back loans, so taking on 6-figure debt, instead of paying back loans, I'm saving mom's house from foreclosure. Because that's what you do when you love somebody and you support them, and when things get hard and you have to pick and choose because you don't have enough to go around. And those are realities. And I know things have gotten tougher. I know that tuition is just going up and cost of living is just going up, and wages haven't kept up with that. Despite our bailouts of these corporations, despite our corporate welfare, despite all of these, you know, economic theories that say that if we continue to boost up the people who have the most resources and control our markets, that's somehow going to trickle down and impact us on a day-to-day level in our everyday lives in every community across our country. And it's just not true. It's not. We've seen these systems and these policies fail time and time again. And I know that my opponent was here just a few weeks ago, standing up in front of you, being in this office 18 years. She's been a legislator in our state since 1994. And I don't see the improvements that we need for people who are coming out of college, who are investing in themselves like I did. I still am hearing stories of students working 2, 3, 4 jobs to afford the cost of living and pay their tuition. Because when you grow up poor, you don't have a family member who can co-sign a loan. And when they do, they're on your back. And that's just one more burden you have to bear. That's the reality that I'm still hearing from students. Look, I'm 20 years graduated from law school. I've been an attorney for 15 years, 20 years graduated from undergrad. And I am still bearing this burden of 6-figure debt and being caught up in this consumer credit cycle. We have to change these systems. We have to prioritize people over profits. We cannot continue to allow this profiteering off of a pandemic, profiteering off of a war, because these things do make a lot of folks a lot of money. And we got to follow that money and see who benefits. Because it's not students, it's not our youth, it's not our families, it's not our laborers, it's not our workers. But these government officials, these career politicians who've been in office, will stand up and point the finger and blame everyone else. But do they stand up and take responsibility? Can she even clearly articulate what she's gonna do? Because I didn't hear it during our debate. And if you haven't watched our debate, I definitely encourage you to do so. Because you will at least see somebody answer questions directly and somebody who can't even explain what they mean by what they say. We have a problem in our country right now where we have party politics corrupting our democracy. And it's not okay on either side. I don't care. I'm not a career politician. I'm not a politician. I have yet to be elected to office. But when I'm elected in this race, I guarantee that I'm going to represent for people, not for corporate interests. And I've done that my entire practice as an advocate. I've represented people from all walks of life, all backgrounds. And I can tell you who's standing behind those corporations and standing behind those titles called shareholders. They are people. They are just people, and they don't deserve any greater protection because they have money on the line, that they've put risk out there than anybody else in this country, especially a child who is born with some pre-existing condition, something that's going to require additional care. I mean, how many of our kids nowadays don't need something additional than what we're able to really give them? And we've got somebody who would take away your health care, who won't stop the price gouging when it comes to prescription drugs, who's going to do nothing and say nothing to her oil donors about the price gouging at the pump, who's going to stand there and exploit family trauma when it comes to fentanyl, which has been in our streets, damaging our communities, along with all the other opioids that she didn't seem to care about the last 2 decades when those increases were spiking over 10 years ago. And so it's frustrating, right, to see somebody who's in a position of power be so powerless. It doesn't matter whether she wants to do the right thing or not. She's not able to do the right thing. She is pushing a national agenda for her party. And what we need more people who are not tied to failed policy, who are not, beholden to their relationships in Congress right now or with other, elected officials across the state. There's a lot of, behind the scenes stuff that goes on that I've learned about. And so one of the things that I feel like I can do stepping into this role as a new candidate is say, look, you don't have to have done this before to know how to do the job. This is a job for the people because you serve the people. This isn't about special interests. This isn't about having some prerequisite, knowledge or degree or background. This is government. And I was chatting with you earlier, but I've chatted with a few people about how we make politics more of like a community sport that everybody can engage in. And I know that comes back to education. That includes our K through 12 education. It includes higher ed at the graduate level, where we're really getting people civically engaged. Because the biggest reward we can have is that our democracy continues to work for another 200 plus years. This social experiment that we've all kind of been forced into, we'll say born into, right? And then we are now subscribed to because we benefit. And then we have to accept those burdens and responsibilities that come along with it. And I feel like I'm stepping into my part. I'm stepping into my role in my community in a place that I genuinely care about. I'm raising my kids here. I'm running my practice here. And it took a lot of people in my community who just gave a damn and actually saw some worth in this, young girl from Hilliard that maybe could do something with her life. It didn't have to be a lawyer, didn't have to be any one thing. It could have been anything. And that's the whole point, right? Is to have the opportunities and make sure that there's more pathways to people being successful in whatever they choose to do with their lives, however they choose to identify or express themselves, that we have inclusive communities that are welcoming, where we can show love, where people can feel a sense of belonging. We know things aren't great. There's a lot of safety issues out there, and we're not going to ignore those. We know we need to build partnerships in our community at every level between our agencies so that things can be safer, where we can invest in mental health services and substance abuse services, where we can make sure that our law enforcement has resources to actually respond to the things that are happening in our community, where everybody's housed and everybody has health care, because there's enough money out there and enough resources. If we stop letting those at the top, create this stratification, create this ruling class, it doesn't have to be that way. And again, for me to be a representative, I've got to show up and listen. I've got to hear from you all what's important, what you want to see a representative fighting for in Congress that's going to impact and make a difference for the people here in Eastern Washington, the people down here in Whitman and Pullman, here at WSU. So let me go ahead and open it up for questions. And thank you for letting me give you my
Okay, we have about a little over half hour for some Q&A, and I'm, out of respect to our speaker and other guests, I'm going to ask you just to keep your questions short and limit them to maybe one follow-up. So.
And I'll keep my answers short so we can get through a few of them.
All right, so a week ago, Cathy McMorris Rodgers was here, as you mentioned. She talked a lot about clean energy policy and how she's looking at speeding up the permitting process for nuclear power plants, for dams, for other non-carbon sources of power, basically. She talked about carbon recapture and things like that. So my question for you is, in what ways would you be an improvement on Cathy McMorris Rodgers, specifically in the field of clean energy policy?
Well, I think we do hear a lot of talk, right? But we're like behind the gun in terms of projections. You can't have it both ways. You can't be a science denier and a climate change denier and then say, but I'm going to make sure that we spend the appropriate time, energy, and money putting forth programs that are going to help us create more sustainable energy. I'm a fan of, investments in nuclear energy. I think that there is something that we can do there. We also have to be really aware of what that puts a huge target on our back, right? In terms of right now, we're looking at, a war with, not us in particular, but where we're going to be in terms of this war with Russia. So these are real considerations, and what does that mean? Is this really for energy? Is this going beyond that? So giving some thought and consideration of how that impacts our region, what jobs that brings to our region, and who's making those investments. Again, I always think the money and who benefits. But I also don't think that it's appropriate for somebody to show up 18 years into the job to take credit for something that's happening now, when they haven't been a proponent of this over almost the last 2 decades. So I still see it as too little too late, and we need somebody who's going to be more progressive to help push forth those policies and do a better balancing act, I think, in terms of who's at the table when it comes to input and what direction we're going when it comes to whether that's natural gas, whether that's nuclear energy, so that we're making sure we're hearing from everybody who's going to be impacted, and this isn't just about profits.
Well, I want to thank you for coming, and also I want to congratulate you on your successful nomination for the Democratic candidacy. And appreciate the fact that you're coming in to face a pretty formidable foe. You know, somebody, as you mentioned, who's had 9 terms in Congress. We oftentimes, almost always, seem to see a different Democratic candidate every 2 years. So, and there needs to be some momentum, you know, going forward. So my question to you is, should you not be successful this time, what are your plans going forward? Are you going to be one of those that are one and done, or do you have a vision for beyond this?
I do, and thank you for that question. I do intend to run again in 2 years, because even when you win, you still have to do it every 2 years. And I know as a new candidate, like, I don't have name recognition. I haven't served in the state legislature. I'm literally a solo practitioner with my own law firm in Spokane, right? I mean, unless you've used my services, you probably don't know who I am. My sister ran for city council. That was really encouraging. I had some other friends step up and run, both in the judiciary and other positions. And so I saw this as an opportunity to really build our voter engagement and outreach, and this being foundational in that it is every 2 years, just like our state legislators, and seeing what we can do working collaboratively. So there's some great folks that I've been able to get to work with across our district, and I think we're seeing an impact. You know, Walla Walla and Whitman County have shown that we can move the needle blue. If we can do that in more rural counties, we can do that in Spokane, where we have our population density, which is what we really need to push. And you know, getting folks organized up there has been really, really difficult, but I've been able to come out to some of the smaller communities and see the organization with people who are just closer connected, right? They get to leverage those relationships and take some of that motivation and encouragement back to Spokane, so we can do more of that there, and really get the voter engagement up. You know, it's all about turnout. There's enough ballots out there. If our 40 and under really turn out the vote, we can determine the outcome of these elections. And there's a lot of opportunity right now on the ballot, with more Democrats stepping up to run across the district, which is now 12 counties. Was 10 counties before state redistricting. Now we are 12. We added Adams and Franklin. So there's just a lot of opportunity here. And the demographics of our counties are changing. We're growing population-wise. We're seeing more young folks, young professionals. We're seeing more diversity in terms of like race and background, people coming from out of state. So that's encouraging, right? And we want our representation to reflect that. You know, things get stagnant after a couple decades. And so I think we're seeing that with a lot of career politicians who are still stuck on the, you know, what they know, and aren't able to really push things in the direction we need them to go.
So you said that a lot of your work and a lot of your passion comes from like standing up to corporations, and especially against those corporations who kind of use their money to bully people around. I was just wondering how you would stand up to Democratic Party leadership who takes a lot of money from these corporations and supports them through legislation.
Well, and I think if we're going to call it out, we got to call it out on both sides, right? You can't call out there being a problem with another kid if your kid's doing the same thing behavior-wise, right? So, I mean, we've got to clean up our party on both sides. I think with the Republican Party, it's a little bit different with the extremism. Like, they've got different issues they're dealing with. You know, pushing out the fascism and the authoritarian, you know, dictatorship that's come in and tried to take reign and control, and push out people who are saying, hey, look, like that doesn't represent all of us. You know, we're not just a homogenous party either. Democrats, the same thing, right? We do have career politicians in there, and a lot of them have corporate donors, and they are beholden to some failed policy and willing to give tax breaks when that maybe isn't going to benefit the communities where those companies are going to be using resources or labor. And we've allowed companies to think to not have to pay the true cost of labor, and now we wonder why they're so upset that we're saying you should have to. Right? Like, when you've been getting a deal every time you go to the store, and now all of a sudden you got to pay full price, doesn't feel so good, does it? But when you pay full price and you know that's going to have a direct impact in your local economies, with families, with neighbors, with people, and you actually give them some worth that they deserve, and it's not just about how much of their labor you can capture to improve, you know, your own net worth. Those are the realities that we're going to have to shake this up. And so, yeah, there's a lot of Democrats who aren't going to be feeling that either. And we've seen movements across our country with that too, where, you know, we've seen some younger Democratic candidates that are more progressive come in to oust some of the senior, more conservative Democratic leadership. And I think that's necessary, but it's hard as hell. I'll be the first one to tell you. This race is hard, but it wouldn't be that much easier to take on a Democrat in my own party. The reality is right now, for example, with Patty Murray, Tiffany Smiley is just simply not the answer because she spewed the exact same rhetoric and scripted talking points. Now you can go back and capture their talking points. You can even go to the county auditor in Spokane, Bob McCaslin, said the same thing to my face that Tiffany Smiley said at her debate, that Cathy McMorris Rodgers said at her debate, because these are canned, scripted responses that they're required to get in order to serve in that capacity and have the support of their party. If you don't fall in line, you get kicked out. That doesn't happen in the Democratic Party because, mentioning earlier, nobody was really standing in line necessarily to run this race. At the time I announced, I didn't know there was even going to be another Democrat in the primary. But I knew I'd been organizing the community. I'd been showing up. I did our county redistricting for Spokane County, which is the largest here in the 5th Congressional District. And so I just saw this again as an opportunity to build and do the groundwork that we are missing right now in terms of having enough voter engagement so that we actually get representation that reflects the majority of the constituents and voters here in our district.
Thank you.
So like you mentioned how Republicans have to like fall in line more than like a lot of Democrats. So I was wondering if there are any major Democratic platform like policy planks that you disagree with.
You know, I would say a lot of them are like the substance of them, like the base, but I think in terms of like progression, what I see is like too little too late. So with investments in education or like student debt relief, like if we're gonna do it, like make it more impactful. Like for me, 20 grand of 170, which of like 60 plus is interest, like either get rid of my interest, give me 25% relief, change the damn laws for bankruptcy so I can reorganize like a corporation. Because the reality is if I had just started a business out of high school and somebody co-signed on, you know, a $250,000 loan for me, and I didn't pay it back and I screwed up that debt and I ran my business into the ground, I could reorganize that in 7 years and be done and move on. And that's not gonna impact whether or not I can save for my kids, for my retirement, and that's what's unfair to me. So for me, it's like, no, I wanna see a whole lot more. And when I see things like our bankruptcy code or our tax code that have been in some ways written by the lobbyists, you know, by corporate interests, that to me is frustrating because now we have to go back and fix the damage that we've now caused, which is gonna cost everybody more money. And we shouldn't pin it on the less resourced folks, right? We can't pin it on people in poverty. We can't blame the social democratic, you know, spending programs that have helped people like me even get the hell out of poverty, right? So if we cut back on welfare and housing and SNAP and WIC programs, you're going to have more people on the streets who can't afford to make it. They can't keep up, especially with the demands of technology. You have to have access to the internet to function in today's society. And getting to the library where you may be able to get free internet isn't always accessible either, especially when you live in a rural community, right? So all of this dependency that we've created to try to make things more efficient or profitable, I should say, for corporations, let's peel back those layers and see who's standing behind those corporations. Let's see in the names of those shareholders. Let's expose the donors that who've been able to hide behind these PACs as far as giving money to candidates that have written these laws. You know, that's what House representatives do. They write the laws. And when those laws are self-interested and benefit the few over the many, to me, that's not democracy. That's a pay-to-play system. We've seen it with the music industry. I've done copyright law. So for me, it's like why are we pulling from failed systems, right? We've got to do something better and we've got to do something different. And I think a big part of that, though, is reflecting values and where our values really lie. So I probably got a little bit away from your question there, but you know, it is, I think, just really important that we have the opportunity to ask our candidates like where they stand on these issues and get their answers.
Oh.
My question is that I think when Cathy McMorris Rodgers was here, she mentioned that they were talking about the age of the people who run Congress. How much of that do you think has to do with term limits, and what is your position on term limits?
I think term limits are helpful because the reality is we have term limits in the sense of like you can vote people out and vote people in every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years, whatever the term is. But once you're in that position, you have so much support to hold that position. I honestly believe, like, let's say Cathy was done, she wants to retire. She doesn't get to retire, right? You are in a position, you have to be loyal to your base, you have to be loyal to holding power for this party, right? And so I think it goes to say that if we have term limits, it avoids that imbalance of power. For example, even people in our own party, right? Like there are career politicians on both sides. Nobody in the Democratic Party is going to stand up and run against Patty Murray. How are they going to be able to? They're not going to get any support. I've got no support from the state party financially. I've got no support from the DCCC financially. They are not invested in this race because they know it's a hard race and it's difficult, and so there's no real competition in that. And the reality is because of the lack of term limits and because of our campaign finance laws with Citizens United and all of that, there is unlimited money that gets to be poured into these races, and so that means that those folks have a little bit more control and power over who ultimately gets elected. I hear all the time on Twitter and social media, I don't have enough signs, I don't have enough commercials, I don't have any mailers, I don't have this, I don't. For the most part, what I can really do is drive my little car around and show up and be in person and meet folks and ask you to earn your respect, your vote, have you leveraged your networks? Because these things are expensive. You're talking about mailers that cost tens of thousands of dollars to go to like tens of thousands of people. Well, there's 750,000 people in our district. And so that's a lot of money. And the commercial and ads. So who makes money off campaigns? Advertisers do. It's a very profitable industry, I can tell you that much. We did unionize our campaign because one of the things I wanted to make a really strong statement about is how we treat employees and how we respect labor. And yes, it costs more. Can you believe that? It's going to cost me more to employ people as a unionized campaign than it would otherwise. But that's important because I want to make sure they have the protections and they know that if they get sick, they can call in and they don't lose pay. There's little things like that, and they feel encouraged by that, right? So that the trade-off is the morale. It's about that investment back into the relationship. So I 100%, I don't know what they should be. Do we want somebody in this seat, for example, for more than 10 years? That sounds reasonable to me. Senate, 6 years. Do we want somebody to have more than 2 consecutive terms because of consistency? I think there's real questions there, and I think that people should be able to decide that.
Thank you.
First of all, my name is Joel Velasco. I'm a graduate student here in molecular plant sciences. Even if you don't have your desired outcome in this race, please continue forward. Because we're all in this political the discourse around this region is well, it's heavily favored in the other direction, but no. What you're talking about is at the core of what's necessary here. The student debt relief was a pittance, and they could have actually done away with all of it, at least 50,000. I mean, something to it that actually has an impact, because there are a lot of young professionals that are burdened with that transfer of that financial burden to the individual, and just the overall commodification of academia. But you're speaking to the heart of it, and the shot across the bow with respect to, it was President Biden from Delaware who made it to where you cannot do away with that student loan debt. So that is an unfortunate truth that needs to be understood, in that corruption is the name of the game. I came here completely unbiased and just aware of where we're at, and I was in this room. I don't even remember her name. It was a couple cycles ago, but she was like a carbon copy of Cathy McMorris Rodgers, but on the Democratic side. And it's the product of these consultants that make a lot of money from a corrupt system that, there's amoral actors that are essentially pumping insane amounts of resources into our races, information outlets. But you have the main thing you spoke to is student loan debt and childcare. That's the things that people in the area that I'm my friends and colleagues need is actual representation from this seat, not just a political power player that just kind of serves their party. And I've also been to Cathy McMorris Rodgers. We shouldn't make it a personal thing. It's not a personal thing. This is really just we're in the bowels of failed systems that we need to, instead of attacking our institutions, we need to build them up. We need to fortify them, and you have my support moving forward, and you can count on me with regardless of your outcome here. But please keep moving forward here.
Thank you. Well, and the goal too is to get more folks doing this, right? More new folks who are willing to step into this arena, because it's daunting, right? It's difficult, and not everybody's going to be in a position to do this kind of work, maybe run for office, but there's so many other ways to get involved. And we don't need more carbon copies. One of the things I say about being a lawyer, we need as many different kind of lawyers as there are different kind of people. I mean, medical providers too, right? Like, don't you want to feel connected to the people who are public servants in your community? I know that's one of the main visions here of the Tom Foley Institute is to really, train our students and the community to be public servants. That's the only way we're going to really have a full tie-in. When you see people so disengaged from their community that they would literally go and kill children. I mean, that's the reality of how disconnected some folks in our community are. That's not healthy. That's not okay. That's not normal. But we are in a new normal. Things have shifted a whole lot, and we're going to have to shift along with it. And we have a lot of resiliency as people, as human beings, as a society. So I see a lot of hope there, and that's one of the things we've talked about is bringing that hope. I can only be me. I can't be a carbon copy of something. I don't agree with everything in the Democratic Party. I don't think everything in the Republican Party is evil or the demon or anything like that. I think people are people, and we all, have different beliefs and different things that stir us up in terms of our passion. And sometimes our experience can hurt us. Sometimes what we know can hurt us because we are indoctrinated in a lot of ways. We are trained in a lot of ways. And it took a lot for me to kind of step outside this title of being a lawyer and the elitism that can come with that, right? Where I could just be a partner at a law firm and I could be playing the Olivia Pope from Scandal and, making a bunch of money and, having the best outfits and whatever. But, for me, I realized that wasn't going to serve me the way that I wanted to serve, and what I could give back to my community by stepping up and saying, okay, let's have these conversations, let's talk about the issues, let's make sure people know that there's other options, and new pathways. Let's create some new pathways to folks getting into politics, getting into school, getting into any industry that they want to. And the reality is we know you don't have to go to 4-year, you don't have to go to a graduate program, you don't have to do any of these things. But it's fulfilling, and if that's what's in you and that drives you, you should have access and opportunity to do that. And if you want to go work with your hands or you want to go work with children, going back to your point about childcare though, two sides of the coin, and going back to your comment about, term limits or even age, we know that there's some great politicians at all ages. That's not the issue. And I think with Patty Murray, for example, her being in office so long, it's like, how much progress are we going to expect? Versus somebody who's maybe just her same age but new. So I think there's opportunity. Why? Because a lot of grandparents right now are suffering on that end of picking up the expense for childcare. If it wasn't for grandparents in my community, and I mean my immediate community, like friends and family, and some of these parents were really terrible parents. They were on drugs, they weren't showing up, they weren't doing nothing for their kids when we were in high school. They've gotten clean and sober, and it took a long time, but they're showing up to be grandparents and covering the cost of childcare that their kids can't afford right now. If they didn't do that, then their kids wouldn't be able to work. And then there would be stuck on welfare and subject to housing and all these restrictions in terms of what they can do because they can't get the services in their community that they need. The other problem is in-home care for our seniors, right? Now seniors are worried about whether or not they can maintain their housing because the cost of housing are going to go up. Can they stay in their homes? Are they going to just be shoveled or shuttled into facilities where they get treated like a number in a bed? This isn't their home. This isn't their, comfortable environment. And, not everybody has a home or a family that's going to be able to provide for them to stay in their home. But we are selling people really down the river, going back to that old saying, when it comes to telling them to sell down, pay down their estates and go into these facilities where they're not getting quality care. And I'm talking about food. I'm talking about just, relationships, having time with people. I don't want to get old and have somebody tell me what I can and can't eat. And it's not based on my diet and my health, but it's based on what's available to serve me in this facility that I'm assigned to, as opposed to being able to plan a real future where I can be at home with my family and figure that out with my family. And we've cut off a lot of opportunity and resources for people to be able to do that. We're literally changing our zoning code in Spokane because it's so bad that people can't build, in-law apartments or additional dwelling units on their property. Like all this stuff that's like, what? Okay, so I lived in California for 13 years. I'm like, there are so many other places who've been doing things for a whole lot longer. We're not reinventing the wheel here, folks. We have people in positions of leadership and power that we have elected, that we are paying our taxpayer dollars to who are not getting the job done. Like pure and simple, they're not doing their job. I can call out our mayor in Spokane specifically, Mayor Nadine Woodward, sitting on tons of money, but can't build housing shelters. Like, what the hell are we doing? We're creating a problem so we can complain about the problem, so we can demonize the other. Oh, is this about politics, or is this about our community? Is this about people? And I do feel that that's where there's like got to be term limits. There's got to be campaign finance. There's got to rein this in so there's accountability. Otherwise, we get the mess we're in right now. So again, lots of opportunity for more people to get involved so we can help clean this up on both sides and get a Congress and a government that's actually working for the society we have now, which is a whole lot bigger than it was 100 years ago. And that's why it's important for everybody, especially you're going to sit on the highest court in the land, to know a definition. And everybody can have their own, by all means. There's not just one, right? Because we know dictionaries sometimes have more than one definition. If you don't know the definition of diversity, you should retire. Period. I don't care what industry you're in. Let's just have a blanket line. Clarence Thomas, you can just go home, you and your wife. And that's reality. Because the people who have benefited from these systems turn around and then shut the door on everybody else, they don't deserve to be there in the first place. And that's what we're seeing. And I've been seeing that. And I saw that in my law firms, and I didn't want to pursue the partner track. I didn't want to work in the law firm. I didn't want to be in this hierarchical, stratified, elitist. I didn't. You know, I wanted to get out and share my story so people could understand that there's real opportunities for just people to get involved in their community and step out and do some good and organize. And it doesn't have to be about your degree. It doesn't have to be about your background. I had a lot of shame in growing up poor, and it took me a long time to be able to say, oh, you know, I can use my background, my past, my experience to hopefully connect with people who want to change these systems so there's better outcomes. Let's go back to questions because I know we only got 15 minutes here.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for being here. On behalf of all the room, I think we all appreciate you, Tom, for being out here. You have an amazing persona, if you will. I'm loving it. My question is, what advice, and you've already given some tips, what advice would you have for, say, a student who's hoping to pursue politics in the future? Any?
Definitely get involved. You know, that's one thing too, is here in Eastern Washington, there's a lot of campaigns and there's not enough staffing. So there's opportunities to not just get the experience, but to also get paid. I'm very much a proponent of like, let's pay people, let's make it fun and entertaining, and feed them, you know, like we see here today, because, you know, let's make it social and memorable. And, you know, when we can fill all the senses, that's important. But access is easy here. You know, you can come work on my campaign. We're doing this again in 2 years. We still got 5 days left. There's still 5 days left. Thousands and thousands of people out there have not turned in their ballots, so there's opportunities right now for people to get involved. But in terms of actually getting real experience, so you kind of understand some of the software that's involved, how you can support candidates, how all these different things work, you know, the different position, whether it's a campaign manager. I didn't know what a campaign manager did. I have now taken on that role. We have a very, very small operation here. What our finance director does, what the treasurer does. So that's really kind of cool. It's building a whole business bigger than my practice that I even have. But I would say that there is a lot of opportunity to get involved. You can work with some of the consultants who work with different candidates across our state, which get you exposure to a whole bunch of campaigns. State Party has a lot of opportunities, and a lot of those are paid, and they'll send you around and they'll cover some of your expenses that way too for a little bit of travel. So it's really cool. It opens up a lot of opportunities to build relationships. And if you are looking to get into politics, meet as many candidates and people on, you know, from all parties, right, and backgrounds, and talk to them. Be in a position where you can ask those questions. So coming to this obviously opens up that gateway as well. But it's really easy to get involved because every campaign needs staffing. Like, even though Cathy has all this millions and millions of dollars, there's not a ton of people that are just jumping in and available to go out and actually do the work that we need, like knocking doors, making phone calls, you know, doing postcards. There's a lot of things that go into it. Social media is where the younger folks who are adept with that are going to kill the game, because that's where most of the interaction happens, and content is everything, right? You know, that people want to see pictures and videos more than they want to read text. We know that from TV versus newspaper and radio. This is just, you know, how the world is working these days. So to the extent that those are skills that you have and tools you know how to use, that brings a lot more viability and visibility to campaigns. So I know folks are looking all the time to hire. And again, lots of opportunities to get paid too.
And let me just plug, you can also get academic credit.
Yes,
For an
and
internship,
academic
so.
credit for internships. That's absolutely right.
Thank you so much.
I know there was obviously a lot of turmoil when like Roe v. Wade was overturned, and President Biden has made a lot of statements saying that if we can win the midterms, they can codify some more rights to privacy and right to abortion. And I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that stance, and if you see that this is possible from the Democratic Party to actually solidify a real law around the right to that.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a push, obviously, even before the election, you know, for that to happen, for Congress to take some action. And, you know, there's definitely a school of thought in terms of, like, the more people can agree, then the less, you know, that was the issue with the Supreme Court, it being a split decision, like, where it wasn't unanimous, there was more, you know, right in the middle. So there was that opportunity for it to come back up and be overturned. So I do think we can get there. So to answer your question, yes, I think we can get there. I do think we need to have that Democratic majority, obviously, to get there, because it takes a lot of persuasion. You know, this is a one issue vote that raises a crap load of money on both sides. So the longer it exists, right, it's like par for the course. And so I don't think we should ignore that, right? I think the Democrats use it the same way the Republicans do, you know, to use it for campaigning and for fundraising. The reality is we need something that reflects the majority interests across our country, and we had something in place that seemed to be working. And yeah, it's a balance, right? These are real issues that come up apparently in a society. For me, really frustrated to see that precedent was ignored. Something that we're taught, you know, in law school that is really important. It is the law of the land. You treat it as such, and you don't just get to substitute your opinion. Bigger picture is privacy rights and how this impacts individuals and our government and individuals, not just our government, but individuals using government authority to interfere in other individuals' lives. Like a sibling who's worried that, you know, their niece or nephew may be aborted, and they can raise issues there, and that there's bounties on people's heads. And this is taxpayer dollars. This is a judicial system that moves very, very, very slow. So there's those reality concerns, regardless of your morality or your religious beliefs around this issue. The practicality is that it's not safe for a society like ours to not have safe access for all citizens to medical procedures, whether that's an abortion or not. Nobody's ever said that this goes without any guidelines or restrictions ever. That's like, you would think, and I think Tiffany Smiley said this and Cathy said this, these abortions till the day of birth. That's not an abortion, sweetheart, and that's going back to what you think. You cannot just pick and choose the science that you believe that suits your argument or your position to make you look good so you can take credit for something and then ignore other science. I mean, one of the things that we were blessed with is people who were able to develop the skill and the knowledge, and gosh, didn't we experiment on a whole lot of people to get the knowledge we have? Let's not disrespect the people's bodies who have already been taken advantage of and disrespected, for us to even know what we know now, so that we can treat people humanely and full disclosure, so people know what's happening to their bodies, and they can make informed decisions themselves and not have a government decide for them. And especially when we live in a world where we simply do not take care of the people here on our planet well enough to be forcing anybody to bring children into this world that are not wanted. Lots more hands.
So, aside from reforms in bankruptcy law, what would you propose to provide credit to the people who don't have access to it? There seems to be a substantial portion of our citizens who only have option of credit cards, which is not a great option.
Well, I do think that when it comes to like our credit laws and our consumer finance, right now I understand one of the biggest considerations is that debt to income ratio. Well, the reality now too, when you look at the cost of housing, for example, like if you're applying for a lease or any other credit, but the debt to income ratio is going to be a big deal. And everybody's impacted by that with the increased cost of living and interest rates going up. And it limits the ability to access that system. And there's a lot of folks these days who need access to credit just to function. Whether you're an individual, whether you're in school, whether you're a small business. So I do think there's some reform we could do there. I think we have predatory interest rates and penalties, like penalize. Like we've seen this with bank accounts, and we've learned from that. And a lot of banks have lowered their penalty rates to make it more, manageable for folks who aren't able to cover their balances. But I do think that we've got to offer students a better credit rate and give them some ability to actually build their credit and learn from that. I think it goes back to some education. I mean, I don't expect that we're all just going to be given an interest-free credit card and know exactly how to manage it well, right? But I do think that to some extent there should be more opportunities for folks who don't have credit at all Or like myself, whose family ruins your credit before you ever get started, because back in the day you used to have those like CD and book things. Yeah, there's just a lot of credit card scams that run around our neighborhood. So a lot of kids grew up with bad credit because their parents screwed it up. And so there's not this like one-on-one, there's not this individual like, you fit this rubric or you don't. And I'm in that boat too, where my 6-figure student loan debt, like I couldn't qualify to buy a house, not with my income and my debt to my student loan debt, because now they assess a percentage and make up a number that's not real. And it's never what I would pay, never what I've been asked to pay, and they just make it up, and then that's what they base your credit off of. So I think there's a lot of reform there that we can do, and I think again opportunities for younger folks who don't have access to credit to get started in building their credit. And I don't mean like a $500 credit card, prepaid credit card that you can't really do anything with, but something that's a little bit more substantial, something meaningful. Because if I would have had access to something like that, I would have been in a better position to. It's kind of like, don't give me enough to feed myself, and then then I'm not going to take care of it as well. But if you give me all the tools, and I can put together my kitchen and I've got all the things I need, then I'm set up to cook. And I always felt like for me, when I would go, especially as a student, to school and ask for extensions on credit or student loans, it was never really enough to cover what I needed, which then put me back in the boat of working 2 or 3 jobs and then barely still having enough to make it. But again, sorry, the answer is a little long there, but as far as what we need to do, like we've got to change stuff, and we've got to make allowances for people who aren't already in good credit positions and don't come from wealth, because we're all now being penalized by what we're born into. Right behind you.
Not a fun question, but obviously you've been dealing with a Cathy McMorris Rodgers that says inflation can be cured, and she gives formulas that come right out of her script for the Republican Party. And she does it while holding a gas pump. I just want to run an hypothesis by you just to get it on the floor, which is, I would love to blame, and I think I can, much of the world inflation problem on Trump's love of Putin. He encouraged him. He did nothing to resist him, and when he invited Ukraine, he had this lovely line that was brilliant. Doesn't get quoted much, but had Putin, and that's the hypothesis, and my sense of your view of it. If Cathy McMorris Rodgers had done anything to resist, in any substantial way, the kinds of things that Trump was doing, he would not have potentially encouraged Ukraine and the invasion, which is the cause of much of world inflation problems. Thus, your just sense of that, and whether Cathy McMorris Rodgers would ever admit to it.
Well, one is, I do think that that's a contributing factor, right? Like when you make an authoritarian, government, when Putin's got that little card, whatever it is he's got over him, like the video footage, whatever it is, I do think that the relationship definitely impacted his willingness to go to war. Now he's got his allies, and this looks like the making of, World War III, and what does that really mean? I don't know that Cathy had any power to really do anything. She kind of got booted out early on. She was supposed to be higher up. She was supposed to be part of his cabinet. She didn't get that seat. So I think her hands are tied in a lot of ways. Right now, all she can do is push for more drilling for oil companies. Why? Because that does serve the agenda, I think, that ties into Russia and Putin's war. And maybe they didn't sabotage their own pipeline. I don't know. I don't have that intelligence, and I don't know that all of our Congress members necessarily do. I do think we are dealing with world powers here, and that we're dealing with like a much bigger scale of like that ruling class versus the rest of us. I'm not so naive to think, again, that there's just not more at play there. And what we need to do, I think, as a country is really focus on our democracy here and how we can weed out those problems like a Trump, and make sure that they don't infect an entire half of our Congress right now. Is, even the ones that don't fully agree are powerless to do a whole lot. So I just don't give her that much credit, to be quite honest. I think in some respects she was appointed to her initial position in the state legislature. She has held power. That is all she's done. She was propped up and chosen. One thing I can tell you is nobody asked me to do this. I'm not that special. I promise. I'm really not. So nobody asked me to do this, so I get to say that. There's nobody for me to disappoint. There's nobody's expectations for me to live up to. It's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to stir shit up, to be quite honest. They called me a disruptor in the Inlander. They're absolutely right, because what is going to get more people engaged? Something different. Did we not see that happen with Donald Trump? But that's not the different we're going to get excited about. That's not what we want. We don't have to do it like that. You know, we don't have to be disrespectful and ugly and discriminatory and go full out fascism. We don't have to do that. But we do have to stir things up and really talk to people. And build real relationships and talk about facts, right? And the facts that we can actually prove and not just get caught into this chaos of, distraction, which is kind of how I see it.
We have time for one last question. Yeah.
Just real quick on a little bit of background. When I got out of the military, I went over to Seattle to go to school, and the VA set me up pretty quick. But when I came over here and transferred, it took me about 9 months to see a doctor with the VA, and it's a little bit, I guess, easy on the other side for them to say, like, big government doesn't work, but they're in charge of those big government, agencies like the VA, and they just kind of don't fund it, so that's why it doesn't work, I guess. But I guess my question is, as we start moving into, I guess, Medicare for all and stuff like that, and universal health care, and even with infrastructure, what are ways that rural America is going to be more robust to receive all those benefits that the big cities also have?
No, I think that's a great question. One, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry to hear that that's been your experience, because I've heard that a lot, and I have veterans in my family, I have a military family, but not directly in my my immediate family. And these are real concerns, and I know that when it comes to investments in infrastructure, that's a huge part of it, because we do need to make sure hospitals are accessible and that they are in rural communities, that folks aren't having to travel, hours to get care. And that our systems, that provide, scheduling, obviously the software issue up at the VA in Spokane, that those things are being, there's oversight. And we're getting away from the quality of care in terms of just having these facilities and funding them and people kind of going through the motions. Staff is underpaid, that's one thing. And then the resources aren't there. What I would like to see is universal health care. I think that if everybody's paying in, it's quality of care. You mentioned this whole thing about big government. We don't need big government, but we do need government that's the right size for the size of our country. We can't have this teeny government from the 1800s to serve this, a 21st century population. It just doesn't make sense. And so we're going to have to grow, and we're going to go through a lot of growing pains because of that, and we're going to have to make sure our budget reflects that. But I do believe if everybody's paying in and it's a public service, we're going to get better quality care, because we know what happens in the private sector, whether that's hospitals, whether that's our prison system, that the money goes to the top, and it really goes to like advertising. It goes to profit, it's all about profit, it's all about advertising, it's not about quality of care and access to service. I think of our, post offices in terms of like where they're at. They're in every neighborhood, so you can have access, so you can have the same public service through the post office that anybody else would have, regardless of where you live. And that should be for every public utility. And so I'm a proponent of that for that reason. And I do think our military, and our veterans have been shortchanged. When we see a situation like a bill come up that says, hey, we exposed our own military to lifelong illnesses and things that they're going to have to figure out on their own, and then go through the process of getting coverage for, and we're not backing them up. We're going to make that harder for them. We're going to deny all the science again. She's literally, if you've seen the Jon Stewart special, somebody actually referenced Jon Stewart recently, a politician, talking about this PACT Act that did pass, but Cathy voted against. It's like we're causing harm and we're not even willing to take accountability. How do we have people in office that we're paying to stand up and say we don't have to be accountable for the things that we do? Or I can't explain what I mean by what I say. These are problems. So we can do better. And I think that keeping certain things public are important. Doesn't mean we're not going to have a capitalist society, doesn't mean we're not going to have competition, But we never needed pure capitalism for competition. This is an economic system that exists because we've allowed it to exist. It can take any shape or form that we desire, and ultimately it can be more inclusive and it not be just based on profits. But we have to make sure, obviously, that we're taking care of people and at every level. And there's some people who just are never going to fully function as society with this dependency on technology, where the costs of living are this high, because that's just the reality we live in, and we're not all the same. I hope that I can bring representation to this district that reflects the vast communities that we have, our rural, our suburban, our urban centers, and everything in between, because we need representation at this level, at the federal level, for funding to come into this region for things that we actually need, and that we need now, not 2 years from now, not 4 years from now. But again, we're going to be doing this every 2 years to really build the engagement. So whatever results happen, they reflect the majority of interest here in our district, because that's our democracy. That's how it works. So I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you so much.
Our time's up, unfortunately. Let me remind you, next Tuesday is election day, so make sure you get your ballots in before then. Also, if you want to know who's going to win the election, come next Tuesday, noon here. We have our election forecast panel, which has 3 political scientists on it. And now, join me again in thanking Natasha for